Blog Talk Radio.
You are listening to the McCarthy Project live from Minnesota, where we have been attacking life and sports since 2001.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is Stephen McCarthy from the McCarthy Project, where we have been attacking life and sport since 2001. And today on the show, we are going to have two people that I look up to as far as information is concerned, related to choosing a strength coach for yourself and pretty much at any level. I think the more you talk to the NFL coaches, strength coaches, they have pretty much the same type of problems even as the youth do. And it's interesting because you would think as you got older, the number of coaches that you would actually listen to would go down. But what we're finding is that in today's world of athletics, there are so many people pulling and pushing and trying to get athletes' attention that they're not communicating all that well. But we'll get into that a little bit later, and then at the youth level, we'll be talking about what things to look for. What are you? You're in a position where you know you need to train. Who should I listen to? Should I go to this high school? Big trends in having full-time strength coaches there. So we're going to be covering all bases with Kurt Hester from the Dominant One, and then also with Shawn Myszka of Explosive Edge Athletics. And we'll be just talking about these areas because I think there's a lot of things to be discussed out. What kind of questions you need to ask? Does it make a difference what the training philosophy of the trainer is? Just a lot of cool stuff. So from that standpoint, we're going to go to a quick break, and then we'll be back with Kurt Hester to talk about choosing a strength coach.
Five-Star Basketball, the leader in basketball instruction and camps. Endorsed by Michael Jordan, Dick Vitale, and Hubie Brown, and where the teaching never stops. Five-Star Basketball Minnesota will be hosting a one-day instructional camp on May 18th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and will be hosted by Five-Star, the McCarthy Project, and Grassroots Hoops. For more information on the camp, visit themccarthyproject.com/5-star. XL Athlete is the leading provider of online strength and conditioning and speed development camps. For more information on their training programs and speed development camps, visit xlathlete.com.
Yes, alrighty, we are back. I was just talking with Kurt off air, but nonetheless, this is Stephen McCarthy from the McCarthy Project, and we are going to be discussing strength coaches and how to choose one. I think in my 10 years of being in this industry, I have seen, actually it's been a very quick transition. I think Kurt would actually agree with me that, there's been when we started 10 years ago, and you started longer than that, there wasn't very many of us around, and therefore when you found somebody that actually understood what they were doing, it was a relatively easy decision. You said, well, this guy knows more than me just kicking it around in my basement. But in today's world, there are so many strength coaches. There's so many personal trainers. There's so many dads that say that we're certified. And just to kind of give you a couple of scenarios that we're going to work off is that I've been in a position where I've been into a high school and made a presentation. They said, yes, we want to use you, but my dad, or we have a dad of one of the athletes that is a trainer, and he'll do it for free. And so magically, obviously free versus paid is a good idea, and they go ahead and find they use the dad. Another scenario is where you're young, you're showing some promise, and everybody wants to or would like to work with you. So therefore, you got all these guys coming after you thinking that you're something, But really, it's a big, big choice to make sure you go with the right coach. Otherwise, you might get yourself into a position of being overtrained, or you're not recovering, or you're just training the wrong way, or you're training too early for a certain area. So, I mean, there's a lot of different variables. So, with that, Kurt, how you doing today?
Doing good, man. And
cool.
This is one of the one subject that kind of really somewhat angers me to a certain extent. And for most guys in the field who are good, it really does, because, like you said, there's so many. Like when I came into this field, I think at training athletes at the high school and college level in a performance center over 20 years ago, it was probably me and Mike Boyle might have been like one of the only guys in the country doing it at the time. At a high level. I got to the point where I was training 500 athletes a day. I had 3 5A football teams year round in my facility, and then other baseball's huge in the South. So I had and coming off of coaching at LSU with winning national championships there. I had a few hundred baseball players that I was training per day. So there was no, like you said, there was no one else. I was there by default. I had got all these clients by default because there was no one else doing it. And with absolutely no marketing, it was just open a facility, and hey, I want to go train there. And like I said, now everybody coming out of a kinesiology program or exercise science program with just a basic degree with no knowledge of coaching is now a performance coach, because there is no other avenue, for employment for them unless they go to cardiac rehab, which is very boring. And, but they're sold a curriculum in college that they have all this plethora of jobs that don't exist. And so now they're training in health clubs, or they open up a CrossFit, or, but they have no background in training. They've never coached anybody. They've never been under other strength coaches. They've never interned or GA'd in a strength program. They have certifications, but they've never put that to use. And then you have all these ex-athletes who, just because they played a sport, now they think they're a performance coach. And so parents go, oh, he played in the NFL. Oh, he played in Major League Baseball. He knows what he's doing. But they have no background in training, just what they did for that team. So it's a touchy subject. Just like you said, you went to that high school program. They take a guy that probably has never trained anybody before, besides a couple of old ladies and a couple of soccer moms, and now he's their strength coach.
It's funny because we were on the edge. I thought 10 years ago. I can only imagine what it was like for you 20 years ago, because the thought of today. Can you imagine if you would have had 500 athletes every day today in today's world? I mean, it would be just. I would just fall over, because it was like that. I mean, I remember back in 01, 02, we would have like 18 teams come through this facility, hockey teams, in one night. And it was just amazing numbers at the time. But anyways, now due to competition, so now we're in a position where because each athlete's a little bit different. You know what I mean? If you're a high school or you're a younger athlete, you got to look at it a little bit different than if you're a college athlete, and then if you're a pro athlete, as well. So let's start with the pro athlete. What is their scenario? How should they look at it? How should they select the coach?
I mean, first, I think a lot of guys, until they get a little older in their career, been in their career for a length of time, they're kind of fighting to stay in it. Those are the guys that look at it as an investment, or a guy that's going, into a free agent contract. They look at it as an investment. For the most part, a lot of pro guys, they're cheap. They're so used to getting everything free that they'll go with somebody free, just like that high school team, just so they won't have to pay. And they could, it's like, they don't look at it as, okay, let me look at this guy. Here's where I'm at in my career. How can this guy help me? What is his progressions? How is he going to dissect my injuries, what kind of prehab work are we going to do, how is this coach going to get me from A to Z? And they don't look at it that way. So there's a lot of guys in the field that, if a strength coach or a performance coach, the first thing he tells you is who he trained, I'd walk away, because it's not about who he trained. Because a lot of guys get a lot of professional athletes because they don't charge them anything, and so they just buy. Okay, I'll train you for free just to get so that I can put you on my resume. But that doesn't mean they have any understanding of training. And a lot of parents go, oh, he trained Tim Tebow, he trained so and so he's got to be good. And a lot of times that is not even close to the case. If a coach does say, gives you a list of 20 pro athletes he's trained, he's not thinking about you. He should be asking you questions about your background. What are your goals? What are your past injuries? Here's my progressions that are going to take you from A to Z, and these are steps that we have to take. It shouldn't be about who he's trained in the past. It should just be strictly solely on that client.
See, and that's so true, because I could even say it from the opposite side. When I have put out resumes, it amazed me how many people on their resume could put 3 letters of every pro sport team known to mankind, but yet they were coming to me in the middle of Rogers, Minnesota, to get a job. And I never could understand how they would do that, because they would say NBA, NHL, NFL. I mean, they would say that the whole list.
Right.
I said, well, then why are you coming to me to get a job? If you have that kind of client base, you think you'd be getting paid pretty well, And it's always the interesting thing how that resume, becomes built, if you will. And, yes. All right, so now let's go to the college kid, because, I think the college kid has a little bit of the best-case scenario, because he does have a staff, more times than not, that is interested in him performing at a high level. Is there a selection process in the strength coach at the college level?
Not really. You're pretty much forced to train with whoever's the coach at the time at that university. A lot of times, I'll get college guys. I got a lot of football players right now. They have a 3-week break before they have to report back, and so it's a lot of guys that I've trained. From high, I trained them in high school. They went on to college. They come back home for 3 weeks, and they have to report back. So you only have the college guys. Maybe sometimes maybe 5 weeks out the year. Now it's you have them a couple of weeks maybe during Christmas, but a lot of times on that break they're so burnt out from coming back from a bowl game or for a long season, they don't do anything until they have to report back. So typically it's May, 3 weeks in May that you have them. So and predominantly down here we get it's college, it's football and baseball, whereas probably up there it's football and hockey for y'all. It's probably predominantly y'all's athletes. So and then down here, our college guys play, in baseball, they leave all summer and they go up to Danville, Illinois, they go to Alaska, they go up to Cape Cod, they go to all these different leagues and play all summer. So, you only have them a couple of weeks out the year too, in college-wise. So, unless you have like a Division III player or an FCS, even the FCS guys, they're pretty much stuck at school year-round too now. So, it cuts into your college athletes because it's a year-round thing now. Yes.
Well, see, the thing that's interesting about it is even up in Minnesota, we had talked, I think, briefly about this last time, was that the full-time strength coach has now arrived at the high school level in Minnesota, which I imagine it was, if there's a major revenue sport like football in Texas or football down south, they might have a strength coach full-time already, that is trying to control the program a little bit. But that's a new craze, within the last year or so up here in Minnesota.
Well, down in Louisiana, in Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, you have, they have a PE class. It's athletic PE, and there's a strength coach who, so they lift during school hours, and so they get, have like four or five lifting classes per day, And a lot of schools in Texas and now even in Louisiana. I mean, they have an indoor field. They have a full 10,000 square foot weight room. You play football in Texas and Georgia and some of the schools in Alabama that when you leave and go play at an FCS school, it's a letdown, as far as facilities.
That's amazing. Because that's one thing that, it's kind of interesting when you're up in Minnesota, and you see this because I lost a couple of clients that I had worked with this year. In the past, oh, you're the best thing ever. You're the best thing ever. And then they say, oh, by the way, we hired this strength coach. Can you beat Free? No, I don't think I can beat Free, and it really is a interesting thing, overall about control. Now this is where we're going to go off because I think in the world there are so many strength coaches that are trying to bring in the young athlete now because there are, even though there may be some people at the pro level, there is still the in crowd and then the out crowd, so to speak. And at the college, you got the college strength coach, but in the younger levels, it's pretty much the Wild West as far as whatever you can say goes, almost. And if you were a young athlete, how would you approach finding the right coach for your, like, say for your son or something?
Well, I don't, because of my knowledge, I don't believe in, performance coaches for anybody until they're at least 12, 13 years old. It just, even the company that I work for, we have 23 facilities around the country. They wanted to train 7 to 12-year-olds, and I was completely against it because you don't develop an athlete by doing drills. An athlete develops by playing the game. An athlete, especially from 4 years old to 8 years old, that's when most of your motor coordination is set in. And if you're not playing sports year-round, and that's just not playing sports, playing outside, not being on a computer, not being on playing Black Ops for 18 hours a day. It's being outside, actually being physical, doing things outside, just being a kid, playing tag, playing. I mean, I worked with Brent McFarland, who's a Canadian sprints coach, before he died, in California for a few weeks. And even with college athletes, we played so many conditioning type games of like different variations of tag for conditioning that would make the average human vomit in 5 minutes. I mean, it was. And we play all day, do stuff like that for half the day, and these were with adults, and kids just don't do that anymore. So they're not developing basic movement skills that you have to do, with reaction to another human being. And by going out and doing programmed agility drills, by learning sprint mechanics, that doesn't make you a better athlete. That just makes you good at doing drills. And so
it's like the guy that's done the agility ladder 18 million times, and you ask him to do the Icky shuffle or some variation, two-step or whatever variation step, and he can rip it off, but he can't play.
So it's so from 4 years old till 12, they should be playing every sport. So you play football during football season, you play baseball during baseball season, play basketball, play soccer, because if I look back. Granted, I've trained probably over 15,000 high school athletes in my career. I'll look at the athletes that made it to a pretty high level. In college, they were good at multiple sports because they developed. So then they played soccer, they wrestled, and they played football. So it made them a great football player. And I don't think. I think kids get with their parents and they want to specialize way too early, and so then especially baseball and soccer. So now all they're doing is playing baseball and soccer year round, and they haven't developed any other skills besides catching a ball, throwing a ball, or kicking a ball, or hitting a ball. And so it hinders their development as an athlete.
Unbelievable. See, the funny thing is there's such a big like we call it checkbook hockey up here. He who has the biggest checkbook can do whatever he wants or would like to do. And at that level, that is what it becomes, is because if you have a checkbook, you can go off and say, I'm working with this trainer. And then all your buddies want to keep up, so then you're over there trying to do the same thing. It's like somewhere along the line you got to take a step back from this and say, you know what, I'm in control of the ship here. I'm going to dictate how my son is developed, and realize that just because you're not training 3 days a week like everybody else, that you're actually probably helping your athlete more than if you're having them train. It's just amazing things. Talk about the game thing, because I think that's another piece that people would say is a waste of time. But can you give more information about when you were, were you on staff, or were you just observing, or how was that working?
You talking with Brett before him?
Yes.
No, I just went up there to work to work with him and learn. As part of my career, like I said, pre-internet, I was pre-internet. I came up in the dark ages. So, when you had to learn something, you actually called the coach up and said, hey, can I fly or drive in town and work with you for a certain amount of time? And for the most part, I was so aggressive that, I never had a coach tell me no. They were like, sure, Kurt, if you could afford. And then once I get up there, like, man, if you want to stay a month, I would stay as long as I could afford it. Sometimes I'd sleep in my truck. Sometimes I'd sleep on their office couch, took showers in the locker room, just so I could learn. And with a lot of these games, we would, we'd play these tag games where we'd make a circle with cones about 20-yard diameter circle, and we'd have 10 athletes in the middle of it, and you would just run around trying not to get touched. And then if you were touched, like we had one game where if you were touched, you had to lock arms with another athlete who got touched, and they would run around trying to tag somebody. So every time that someone was tagged, they would have to increase the link. So you'd have 3 guys, 4 guys, 5 guys, and then still run around trying to touch the other guys. And, we just did multiple variations of tag, like that. Like even old school freeze tag where you'd touch somebody, they have to stand there, their legs spread, and for them to be released, someone would have to run and dive through their legs. And we're talking with Olympic-level sprinters. We're doing this. We're playing this game. Guys on the Canadian sprints team, and it was so it was relatively fast, and we do just multiple variations of tag games for conditioning.
Unbelievable.
For 45.
So now we're unbelievable. See, that's one thing I think about. You think about it is the development, because there's so much of this, the neuromuscular side of making decisions, of understanding angles. Because we had a guy named Max Siebold on last Friday, and he's the All-Pro lacrosse player and National Player of the Year, yada yada yada, and he explicitly said the reason why I felt I was good is because I understood angles better than everybody else. And those are the things that you learn in games. It's not something you learn by lifting 300 pounds.
No, it's not something you learn by a programmed, cone drill or an agility ladder drill. And the thing is just, sports is reactive. So I don't think there's probably 2 components in training that I don't think a lot of people do enough of, and one is balance work, incorporating balance work into their training programs, and 2 is reaction. And when you're playing a game, you're reacting to either a ball or another player, and there's not enough reaction work in drill work. I don't think it's just the athletes just go in and do everything's programmed. They know what the drill is before they go into it. And that doesn't make a better athlete. And that's why playing multiple sports is so important for a young athlete. And these parents have to get rid of, I'm paying the best trainer for my 10-year-old. It's like, look, your 10-year-old just needs to go play. He needs to go outside and play. And that's free. And you don't have to spend any money. I mean, when I was in Nashville and I just finished training Tebow for the draft, I had a parent from Texas call me. I want to move to Nashville, and I want you to train my son just like you trained Tebow. I'll pay whatever whatever it costs. I want the same like nutritional program. I want train. We'll homeschool him. I'll train him. I want to train him 6-7 hours a day. And I was like, God, how old is your son? He's 4. Oh, and I don't think I've ever gotten. So I berated this guy for 15 straight minutes before I hung up. I said, you know what? Child Protection Services should take this kid away from you. You do not deserve to be a parent. You're a complete moron. You need to let your kid go play in a sandbox. He's 4 years old. A parent like you is, your kid will probably be suicidal before he's 12. I was so aggravated with this guy, but I was, it just amazed me, at the way parents are about sports and their children now.
So that's a serious checkbook there.
Yeah, it's a real serious checkbook.
All right, we're going to go to a quick commercial break, and then we'll hit those two mid-range, basically 12 to 15, a little bit before high school, and then in high school. And then we'll talk about some questions that parents can ask, because I think that's the big key, is how do you get the information so you can make a decision. So we'll be right back after the break.
Five Star Basketball, the leader in basketball instruction and camps. Endorsed by Michael Jordan, Dick Vitale, and Hubie Brown, and where the teaching never stops. 5 Star Basketball Minnesota will be hosting a one-day instructional camp on May 18th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and will be hosted by 5 Star, the McCarthy Project, and Grassroots Hoops. For more information on the camp, visit themccarthyproject.com/5-star. XL Athlete is the leading provider of online strength and conditioning and speed development camps. For more information on their training programs and speed development camps, visit xlathlete.com.
Alrighty, we are back. This is Stephen McCarthy. I am with Kurt Hester, who has trained, you had just mentioned earlier, nearly 15,000 athletes over his career, which is amazing. And you think about it, from the standpoint of numbers and just seeing people, that you will start to see trends that are outside of just an individual athlete coming up. And I think the last segment, if you're interested in hearing, the straight truth, about training, you got to go get back to that. But we're going to talk about today, or this next segment, kind of the real formative years, the 12 to 15 before high school and in high school. Because this is the part that I've seen on my side, and I'll let Kurt hopefully will agree or disagree, I suppose, in the end. But this is the part where you start to show some promise. Maybe you're an age group or a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, and you're starting to show promise. Things are going well. But you get in this, I need to do what's latest and greatest. And you start reading in the newspaper that such and such a person is doing this type of training. Well, then you run over there and you find that. And then this such that is doing yoga, so then you're over, going after the yoga piece. And then, we got to have core training, so you got to go to the person with the ball, and all that kind of stuff. And it really gets yourself all messed up because you're really overtraining the athlete because they're constantly doing all these different types and forms. So how would you address that type of a scenario with that age group of 12 to 15 right before high school?
If it's a really good facility, it's all encompassing. There's some facilities that you have to pay for lifting, and then you have to pay for plyometrics, and you have to pay for conditioning, and you have to pay for flexibility work. And if it's a great facility, it's all encompassing. It should be all one program. It's not, you don't piece things together here and there, and I see a lot of facilities do that, where they charge for every component of training, and that would be the first place I go, okay, my child's not training here. I'm going to break down the coach first, and I want to see, if he actually went to college, in the field, which doesn't say he's a great strength coach, but at least it says he went 4 years and has a science background. And then, see if he's certified, which goes, okay, well, he was smart enough to pass a test. Still doesn't tell me if he can coach or not, or if he has a great system of training athletes. But that's, you got to go through that criteria first. Then it's just asking them questions, of what is your evaluation process? How if there are problems from past injuries or in the evaluation process, if you're finding joint malalignment, or if you're finding muscle imbalances, how are you going to fix that protocol? What are your methods of training, and how does it relate to my child? If my child has absolutely no experience training, technically, how are you going to progress him through without him hurting, overloading his structural system so that he doesn't blow his spine out, he doesn't, blow an ACL out? How are you going to get him from point A to point B? I think basically people have gone so, they want high tech, and they want the latest, greatest new invention on training, the newest machine, the newest fad. And bottom line, athlete has to get stronger. And I think we're getting so far away from just basic strength training. And a young athlete, if you can't get a young athlete stronger with the amount of testosterone flowing in their body when they're young, you've got to be the worst strength coach on the planet, because you could do a Bowflex and a Thigh Master and they'd probably get strong as hell. Because they have so much test flowing through their veins at that point in time. But I think just basic strength training is the best way that any coach can go. I think we're getting so far away from it because it's not pretty. It's work. For an athlete to get faster in any sport, it's about force production. How much force can they impart into the ground? And if they're weak, somewhere that body's going to break down, whether it's their hips, whether it's their ankles, because whatever force they're trying to drive into the ground, the body compensates and gives somewhere. So, it's just basic strength is where it's at. And I think that people have gone, I have to put a cable, a band, I have to have them standing on a BOSU ball, I have to, or I have to go the opposite way and go, we're going to do 400 clean and jerks in one session and then sprint, a mile and then come back and do 800 convulsive pull-ups in one workout. So it almost makes you want to
laugh because it's true. It's so true. It's like
you almost want to leave the field, but you almost want to leave the field. You almost go, you know what? There's so many morons in this field. I don't want to be considered one of them. I quit.
Who would want to do that? I mean, it's funny because I would, as a young athlete, I would, no wonder everybody's burning out at the 15, That's funny because I'm a big guy that enjoys the mental challenge of things, you know what I mean? And so for a while there, I don't know, I'll just name it, the CrossFit world, I was very excited about because it was a workout that challenged you mentally. So then I started down that route, and all of a sudden, about 2 months into it, I'm like sitting there going like, well, when's the recovery day? I'm not feeling so good anymore. I'm not liking this mental challenge. When's the day off? And so it's funny because it was really something that it may be something to use on a day like, okay, we're going to run the hill today or something like that. It can be used sparingly, but it's not the whole training program from that standpoint.
No, not at all. And the body's going to give, with that type of training, the body's going to give sooner or later, and it's not going to be pretty. And you can't be good at every component in training, every training session. So it's a misnomer to say, oh, we want to be good at everything. Well, you know what? The human body's not built that way. Either you're fast twitch and you're built for speed and explosives, or you're slower twitch and you're built for more endurance. So I mean, it's not, you can change muscle fiber type to a certain extent, but not to the extent to where everybody's going to be a marathon runner and everybody's going to be an Olympic lifter. It's not going to happen. And so it takes a lot of because of the challenge of the thing is with CrossFit, it could be so much more if someone with a brain actually wrote cycles, instead of going, oh, here's the WOD of the day, whatever the hell I want to make up at when I wake up in the morning. and write a cycle where there's recovery. And I think it's getting to that point where people are starting to there's so many injuries in it. I mean, there's so many lawsuits, and people actually who own CrossFits who are really qualified performance coaches. They're looking at it and going, you know what, we've got to change this. I think it's going to come from within inside of CrossFit, that there's some really qualified people that are getting involved that are going to change it, and where they're just not going to listen to Bill Glassman's bullshit and just do things their own way. And I think when that happens, that it's going to be a whole. It's going to change. It's going to change their that part of the field for them. And it's going to take about probably 3 or 4 more years. But I see that coming.
Well, see, the thing that's interesting, because that's the big fad, is the high-intensity interval training. You know what I mean? This kind of kick your butt 17 different ways in 15 minutes. You know what I mean? And it's just, it really, and this is another thing, too, is that, I'm going to ask a question. If you're working with a strength coach, and he has you working out on a program, would you recommend that people do Taibo, Insanity, at the club, or yoga on the side, and how do you bring in those I'm going to work harder than everybody else type of mentality?
I mean, I think it comes from the coaching staff. If you do a great job explaining the whys, and that's what we've always done, and at every level, and it's everything that we're doing, we're saying this is why we're doing this. Every drill, every lift, everything that we do, there's a reason in the cycle, and we're explaining that throughout the cycle. And this is why you don't want to do this, or this. And this is, especially about being explosive and getting faster. And, we have conditioning days. Our conditioning days are going to be hard. Our speed days, they're not going to, because a lot of parents go, oh, Johnny wasn't tired after today's workout. Today's workout was a speed day, and we have max recovery with a max effort sprint. And so he's not. I don't want him tired. If he was tired at the end of the workout, then he got slower. And having to explain to the parents why, because they want Johnny, we want our money's worth. We want Johnny to come crawling out, vomit coming out of his nose, blood coming from his ears every time he walks out the performance facility. And it's like, look, that's not. I can train a chimp to train an athlete in that manner. I said it doesn't take a whole lot of knowledge to bury somebody in 5 minutes.
Well, the funny thing is, I got 2 stories for you, and then we'll have to kind of shut it down. But I remember a coach. I don't remember who it was through the years, but they said the easiest thing in the world to do is to train with more volume. Just turn up the volume. Just turn up the volume. Turn up the volume. And you can look like a great coach, but that is the weakest way as a coach to do so. Anybody that trains with volume only, you got to walk away, because it just doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense at all. Because it just basically
your central nervous system can't recover, and I mean it just doesn't recover, and so you just you progressively get worse. Then it leads to overtraining. You get slower, and then you get injured, and then you try to recover by adding more volume because you're like, oh, I must not be in shape, and then it just it's just a terrible merry-go-round to be on.
It's like the big toilet bowl, just sweeping around, and eventually you're into nowhere land.
Yeah, as soon as you get sucked in for life.
All right, Kurt. I want to thank you. I always enjoy chatting with you. We'll be in touch.
All right, man. Thanks.
Have a good day. All right, we're going to go to a quick commercial. We'll be back with Shawn Myszka to kind of develop out more of how to choose a strength coach and what questions should you ask.
5-Star Basketball, the leader in basketball instruction and camps. Endorsed by Michael Jordan, Dick Vitale, and Hubie Brown, and where the teaching never stops. 5-Star Basketball Minnesota will be hosting a one-day instructional camp on May 18th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and will be hosted by 5-Star, the McCarthy Project, and Grassroots Hoops. For more information on the camp, visit themccarthyproject.com/5-star. XL Athlete is the leading provider of online strength and conditioning and speed development camps. For more information on their training programs and speed development camps, visit xlathlete.com.
Alrighty, we are back. This is Stephen McCarthy from the McCarthy Project, and we've been talking about the selection of a strength coach. And right now we have Shawn Myszka on the phone from Explosive Edge Athletics. And the reason why I go so slow is because there was another company that had a real close name up here in Albertville 10 years ago, and it always slips right out of my tongue. So, anyways, Shawn has worked with pro athletes, young athletes, and everything in between, and is very much involved at the certification level, which I think really brings another aspect to this to say, okay, we work with strength coaches, or we want to work with a strength coach. How do we select one? But I just came out of some classes where I was sitting in there with some younger students, and they come out and they really don't have much. They've read the book, you know what I mean, and they're just dangerous, you know what I mean, and they just just spew everything they know plus. So, Shawn, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, my friend?
Doing very well, doing very well. I'm sorry for that intro, but it really, Kurt got me, he always seems to get me so excited because he was describing about, he had a very, very young athlete at the age of 4, and his dad wanted to train him just like Tim Tebow.
Wow.
And, I've heard stories, but that's the extreme that I've heard of before, but anyways.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy, but, getting a little fired up, getting a little passion and energy here on a Wednesday isn't all that bad, so no need to apologize at all.
That's good. All right, so we're talking about choosing a strength coach, and one of the things that I want to talk about, because I think we've kind of laid the groundwork, and I don't want to go back over the same subject.
Sure.
2 areas I want to cover specifically with you is one is communication, if you're not the only strength coach, because we talked a little bit about that last week. And
sure.
2, the certification process that trainers go through and how that looks, because so many trainers come out with a kinesiology degree or some science degree, which is fantastic. That's the basics. And then they go to the next level to get this some sort of strength certification or a personal trainer certification, and then they deem themselves worthy, and they've never hardly stepped in a weight room before. They really don't even understand how to spot somebody. I mean, that's even like, come on, you got to know how to spot somebody. But they don't, and so let's talk about that aspect. Let's talk about, first of all, the educational process and, what does a good trainer that comes out of that process, what does it look like? Or what does he or she look like?
Yeah, I think that is a fantastic place to start, Stephen, because, the crazy thing is like you had mentioned in the brief introduction, but I am highly involved in the certification process on a number of different fronts in a number of different organizations, as well as having been a professor for a handful of years at a local university here in the Twin Cities in their kinesiology department, and starting to see some of those young professionals very similar to that which you had already described in the introduction. They come out, they don't necessarily have the best awareness when they're actually in the gym or track or field setting, but they have all the book smarts in the world. And the crazy thing about that is a lot of times when families or athletes and families of athletes then are going to try and pick someone out to be their trainer, whether it's a strength and conditioning coach or a personal trainer or, an athletic preparation specialist, what have you. A lot of times they just look for all those letters behind one's name, and it's fine and dandy. I put all the letters that I possess behind my name on my email signature too, just to look cool and because I paid for them, But at the same time, I'm the first to tell you that those are not the things that allow me to be the coach that I am. Those credentials don't make me. It may help my thought process, and my thought process obviously puts, sets a precedence in regards to my training philosophy, but it's things like my attention to detail with each and every athlete or my ability to be present in their lives so they know that I truly care about who they are as an athlete, both on and off the field that really make me who I am. So, I'm not saying that the coach should not possess a great deal of those credentials because, like we've already alluded to, I'm highly involved in some of those processes. But just because a certain degree of book knowledge is present doesn't necessarily mean that we possess the qualities to become a great coach or really take an athlete through any kind of long-term sequential planning. And I think that's the biggest thing, We do need those scientific foundations of exercise phys or, the training adaptation process or the knowledge of movement and kinesiology. And we need to be able to know how that applies. But it shouldn't be the only thing that we look for. That person coming out of those programs, whether it's an actual academia program or whether it's a weekend certification that somebody just got so they could get those letters, people need to know what to look for, and I think that's the biggest thing. When somebody opens their mouth, meaning the coach or the training professional opens their mouth, the person should be able to believe what it is that they say. I heard Kurt talking a little bit in regards to the whys. Being able to explain the whys, I think, is a big thing in our field right now. In a lot of cases, I think I might have even mentioned this on last week's call, when an athlete or a family, parent of an athlete, might bring up to a coach, hey, why are you doing this? If they tell you it's because they told you so or because that's what they've always done, so they're going to continue to do that, that's the wrong answer. You should probably move on. So, it's qualities like that I think are missing in our field with those young professionals because they haven't necessarily engrossed themselves in the process enough to know the intricacies of a weight room, like you mentioned, in regards to knowing how to spot someone, or then some of the intricacies and the peculiarities that will take place when someone has to design a training program specific to an athlete's goal. That's a process that isn't very finely laid out in most of the books when it's under real-world microscopes. When we start to look at it that way, it's not as neatly laid out. So, I kind of rambled there a bit, but you can tell that the topic obviously gets me fired up a little bit, too.
Well, it's funny because that particular statement was the first thing that Kurt said. He said, well, you picked a subject I want to talk about. This gets me fired up because there are so many times. I mean, I know in my short career, I've been doing this for 10 years, and I have not taken the traditional approach. I was 32 years old. I started the company as a kind of like an outside investor, where I was using the services, if you will, because I wanted to be a good golfer, a pro golfer.
Sure.
And then as I worked through it, I spent a couple years working out, and then I would always ask a boatload of questions, and then I kind of took a couple groups. So I stayed under that world for a while, and then I moved over to Cal Dietz over at the U, and I never was on staff down there, but I always was sitting there saying, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing it? That kind of stuff. And it took me a good 5-6 years to really formulate why I do what I do. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And what works, what doesn't work. I think this doesn't mean at the time I could actually say that, I worked with certain NHL athletes because we were, I could have gone that route. But I knew that the things that we were doing were good only in a sliver. You know what I mean? They're only because we were big ball trainers at the time. And that's cool in a small amount of time, but there's so many people pitching, the physio ball for dummies or something like this, and that's where I think the piece comes. Is there's nobody that's willing to invest the time in the process, especially when you come out of college, man, you've already invested 5 years. I should know something, and therefore you're going to go after it. All right, so now let's talk about the other piece now, is that if you were in a position where you were looking for a coach for a young athlete, what questions would you ask when you walked in the door? What would you look for?
Well, I think the biggest thing is there, just even piggybacking on what you said in your last statement and asking the questions. I always encourage people, even when they're first starting with me, and now the people that I'm talking to now at this point in my career are typically going to be older, highly qualified athletes, of the National Football League. But even when I used to train high school or more high school and developmental athletes, I would always encourage people, even throughout the entire testing or consultation process, or even when they're just going through any kind of introduction with me, I encourage them right off the bat to ask everything that they really want to know. I'm a firm believer that anyone who's working with the product, and the athlete being the product, should have to answer those questions. So that being said, I think there's a good number of questions that when you're selecting that strength coach that you should probably ask. You should start with their background, of course, to kind of piggyback on what I said in the last one. Even though I kind of bashed credentials and having a great deal of them, there is something to be said about that. You want someone who's qualified and didn't necessarily just get a piece of paper over the weekend. But that being said, you got to go beyond their degree. You got to go beyond their qualifications and credentials from a certification standpoint, and you got to ask them really how they got to that point with their overall training philosophy. I think that's the umbrella view that needs to be uncovered layer by layer. So asking them how they would summarize their training philosophy, how their training philosophy may differ from that of others in the field, I think those are very important questions, because that can really start to shed some light in regards to where you as the athlete may be expected to head down the road in the very near future. There's a number of other pertinent questions that I can think of off the top of my head when selecting an individual. I think beyond what the training philosophy entails, but how is the athlete or the training process going to be monitored? What kind of tests am I going to be expected to do? And how well do those tests actually correlate to the performance of me out on the track, court, field, etc., especially in regards to the level of qualification that I might be at? Like with my NFL guys, we stop focusing on basic strength because I know it'll have a lack of correlation at the higher levels. However, if it's a high school athlete, if I increase their squad strength, we're going to see a number of different motor abilities and qualities increase exponentially. So knowing that information is important as well. So the trainer or the coach's idea in regards to what types of things are important is definitely something pertinent to know. Beyond that, just trying to see if they have an idea in regards to how they would specifically break down one's specific strengths and weaknesses, knowing that every athlete is going to be different. No two athletes are the same. They're all essentially fingerprints. You want the trainer or the coach to know what it is that they're looking at and how that may change the program that they're going to implement for you as an individual versus the other individuals that they train. And then I think finally, a lot of athletes want to have an idea in regards to the vision that the trainer or the coach may have for them down the road as well. So I think questions that may show you where that coach wants to progress you to in their physical qualities and physical mastery, and how that may match up to what your goals might be as an athlete. I think all of those types of things are super, super imperative.
What's funny? In that list of questions, not one of the questions was who do you work with currently?
Yes. Well, and that's something that fires me up, that would get me on my soapbox, because even though I train, I might be the first person who would want to say, hey, look at all the athletes that I trained, and that should be track record enough for people to choose me or to come to me. I don't believe it is. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I don't, like some of the trainers in our field or some of the coaches in our field, hang up the jerseys of all their former players. I don't do that. I'm not going to use and prostitute my athletes in that way. That's just not something I'm going to do, because I'm going to be quite honest with you. Even though I worked with a good share of studs at all levels that would make some people envious, those people, those given athletes, likely would have been highly successful with or without me. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter. There's some freaks of nature. There's some people who hit the sperm lottery, and they're probably pretty good at what they do even before ever performing a set or a rep with me. And so sometimes my biggest job, or any coach who works with athletes of that magnitude, sometimes the biggest job is just not to screw them up too bad. and that's the fact of the matter. I'm just going to be honest there, So we can't disregard the fact that these people are freaks, and they likely will be able to adapt to nearly any training modality. They're essentially F1 supercars, and just the right amount of therapy is going to change them. It gets me fired up when I hear people say, well, they worked with so-and-so. Well, who gives a crap? Like, what have they done for so-and-so is really the big thing.
Oh, they were in the NFL already, and then they made him a better NFLer.
Right.
Nothing.
Well, I tell my guys all the time, my guys in the NFL, I'm like, my job is to make the best better. But so that's a very fine line, and it's not something that would necessarily show or display that I know how to make average athletes good or better. It just shows that I can tweak a little bit on a very highly fine-tuned motor or apparatus and change it enough to give an impact to what they can see out in the field, you know. And it's crazy when I see people just looking at their track record based on who they worked with when you look at them on the field and they don't look any different than that which they looked before they met that individual.
Because it's funny, even in the last segment with Kurt, I mentioned I had probably 4 or 5 years ago when I was really actively hiring trainers and stuff like that, you put out your shingle, say I need trainers. I was amazed at how many trainers could actually list every 3-letter pro league in America, NHL, MLB. And I'm like, well, why are you coming to me in Rogers, Minnesota at this time in your life? I couldn't figure it out. And it's funny because the more you get down to it and you realize that they were hanging this shingle on this one guy they gave it to for free because he just wanted to get some training for free, and so therefore they are professional at NHL level. And it's funny how when you say that is because they really don't have the full picture, and they would have been in the NHL without that trainer anyways, you know.
Right.
But don't say it. That's being real. You know,
and that's the thing, you know. It's kind of crazy to me how many people disregard that idea. You know, and just blindly follow that coach or that trainer just because they worked with, you know, such and such an athlete. It's I see it in my field, you know, and it's a lot of times when our young athletes or our introductory athletes come to us and they want to hear stories in regards to any of the NFL players that may have trained here or that may be currently training here, we kind of sweep that under the rug because that doesn't necessarily show or it's not necessarily indicative of that what they can expect. Kind of like what we talked about last week with a young athlete, or even what you talked about with Kurt in regards to a 4-year-old, you know, following the exact same plan as Tim Tebow or any other professional athlete. It's just not realistic. It's just not what to expect. And, you know, I think it's something to definitely be said when a young athlete or an athlete of any age for that matter is going to select someone to, you know, work with them as a product.
You know, and it's also, I'm going to bring up one statement, and then I know we could go on for hours because this really is something that needs to be fleshed out, you know, and you can get a hold of us if you want after. But there was a time when it was a big college coach, a basketball coach, and he was being honored as the national coach of the year or something like that, and he says, well, I don't really think I'm the best coach in the nation. I think this guy, you know, let's just use it like when Pete Carrill was at Princeton, you know what I mean? He doesn't get the big awards, but he's just as good, if not better, basketball coach than the guy that's getting the national award in front of this because he worked with yada, yada, yada. Mm-hmm. And you have to realize that there are fantastic coaches in your area that may not have a fancy resume, but they may be better for your young athlete than going over and flying here, doing that, doing this, all that kind of stuff. And I don't think people realize that they could have it in their own backyard and they could not stress themselves out so much if they just took the time to find that person rather than just take the first guy that said, hey, I work with pro players. So,
amen. I couldn't say it better myself. You know, I see examples of that all the time. You know, just because so-and-so is being flown out everywhere to work with this group of pro athletes or another, it doesn't mean that he or she is more qualified than the other people in the field. In fact, in many cases, it almost means that he or she might have lost touch with reality to a certain degree and only knows how to really get or troubleshoot for that athlete that's of that magnitude or already of that level of qualification and mastery. And it could be different in regards to when the training process is stalled for an athlete of a differing level and maybe a different genetic inheritance.
So it's almost by blind luck. It's like throw the dart against the wall and boom, it's stuck. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Type of a scenario. And so they were able to win. But in the end, they're only able to win because it's stuck, not because they actually knew what they were doing.
Yes, that's exactly right, and I see it all too often.
Now you got me mad now because that's stupid. That's exactly what it is. It's like the blind luck. Yes, we succeeded. But what about the other 17 guys? Oh, I'm not worried about that. We got this one going in the right direction, So
right, as long as we got the bell cow where he or she is supposed to be, that's all that matters. And the team is eventually going to win then, based on that. You see it happen at every level of all the major professional sports organizations as well. When the one stud is actually able to perform in the way that he or she needs to, and he or she would likely perform regardless of that training process. Now, that's not to say that that person might not be having a major impact on the performance. Otherwise, that makes me, that makes my job not so solidified anymore. But because I do believe that I am better than everyone else at what I do.
But it's true. But yet at the same time, a healthy understanding of who you are. You've got to realize that.
Absolutely. I'm not going to let my confidence affect someone else. But that being said, I think there's some people who do a pretty crappy job out there, but they just happen to work with, that stud athlete who then puts up however many yards or touchdowns or makes this many buckets.
All right, we got to go to a quick commercial, and then we're going to come back to communication because we touched on even this last week. And I think this is going to be the cat's meow because even if you choose the right strength coach and you're going to listen to him, you're going to get so many different opinions. And what are you going to do when those opinions come about? So after the break, we're going to be talking about communication.
Five Star Basketball, the leader in basketball instruction and camps. Endorsed by Michael Jordan, Dick Vitale, and Hubie Brown, and where the teaching never stops. 5 Star Basketball Minnesota will be hosting a one-day instructional camp on May 18th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and will be hosted by 5 Star, the McCarthy Project, and Grassroots Hoops. For more information on the camp, visit themccarthyproject.com/5-star. XL Athlete is the leading provider of online strength and conditioning and speed development camps. For more information on their training programs and speed development camps, visit xlathlete.com.
Alrighty, we are back. This is Stephen McCarthy from the McCarthy Project with Shawn Myszka of Explosive Edge Athletics, right down in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. And we've been talking about choosing a strength coach. And so now we're going to move on to the next step. Now you've made your choice. You've done your due diligence. And now you've worked out with him for 2 months. And you have the first person that comes up to you and says, you know what, Johnny over here is getting great results with this guy over here, and he's doing this. He tells everybody, one of his athletes, to not do what you're doing. And therefore you are in a position now where you've got to make the call. Or you decide to hire a strength coach, a massage therapist, a chiro, I don't even know what else would there be, a sports psychologist, and they're all working together. How are you going to get this whole thing to go forward? And these are situations that are not like outside the realm of possibility. I've seen them. How about, Shawn, what are your thoughts about the first scenario? When that first time comes when somebody says exactly opposite of what you've been teaching for the last 2 months?
Yeah, I deal with both of those situations, ironically enough, that you brought to light all too often, at least with my level of qualification that I work with, the athletes that I work with. On that first scenario, it's inevitable that's always going to happen, especially if you're talking about an NFL locker room and you got 53 guys in there plus 8 on the practice squad plus 11 to 15 new draft picks or unsigned free agents and those types of guys in the room. It's inevitable that you could just be working with one guy and you're going to hear a group of guys always chirping in their ear in regards to what else is out there that guy should be doing. And I think that's why it's important right off the bat to have established a certain degree of understanding with the athlete, throughout the training process so he or she knows why they maybe have been doing what they're doing. So they know and believe in their heart of hearts and in their gut that what they've been doing has been right and optimal for them. And I know that's easier said than done, and some athletes are still going to be going to run at the first chance that they can because these athletes are highly competitive at every level. They want to be better. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're LeBron James or Adrian Peterson or whomever it might be, fill in the blank. That athlete always thinks they can be better. So when they hear the right things, their ears perk up. And that means that you're always at risk, essentially, to lose that athlete. And I think that's where the trust and the honesty and showing them the results and the fruits of their labor, so to say, really come into play. And it's when that happens to me, I very rarely will beg an athlete to stay. I'm definitely not of the desperate sort, because an athlete is always going to make his or her choice in regards to what they feel is right for them. And I want them to make that choice, to be quite honest with you, because if they're kind of going in and they don't wholeheartedly believe in what we're doing, they're probably not going to be able to get the results that I even have set if I have the best possible program laid out for them. So that moment is inevitable. They sometimes come back. That's the thing.
That's an excellent point, because so much of this, you could sit there and say you do the exact same program as the other guy. If you don't believe, then the work you're doing is almost for naught, because you may get some benefit, but it's not going to be the full benefit. That is a fantastic point. I think people don't realize that if you don't believe, then even in strength training world, even if you do the same program, it's still not going to work.
Yes, it's the psychology of success. I mean, what you think about, you become. And if you think the program is crap, even if it's the best program in the world, it's still going to be crap for you. And, even if it's the most highly specific to you and your needs and your level of qualification and mastery, if you don't think it works, it's not going to. And vice versa in many of those cases as well.
All right, so now let's go back to the other, because I think let's actually stay here for a while, because I think in the younger ages is where this idea that the greatest thing becomes even more prevalent, because the dad went out on the internet, or there's an Olympic, or a coach like yourself down in Eden Prairie. We're in Rogers. We're only 15 minutes away. I should get down there to see Shawn versus the other guy. And Shawn says this. You should never do a deadlift. Or whatever. It might be. But you got deadlifts in your program. How do you? I guess in the end you've already answered it. Now that I think about it, it's just that you just got to educate, and then let them make their own decision, I guess.
Yeah, and that's really what I do. Sometimes I'll put certain digs in there, if you will, in regards to, trying to show them the correlation or the transfer between what it is that we have been doing and what it is that they weren't able to do before that they can now do. And, I start laying that foundation just for their own belief as well, not even if I'm concerned with them leaving or trying to go to someone else. I'd start doing that right off the bat so they can start to see and believe and give me more of their passion and energy because of how much they see it transferring. And that's why even on a weekly basis, at least with my National Football League guys, we're watching film. I'm showing them things that they weren't able to do before that they're now capable of doing through some of our training methodologies and in our means and exercises that we've used. And so they can start to get an idea on just where it is that we're headed.
See, I think that's fantastic. So it's so much understanding of why. It comes back. It's amazing when you get good, high-quality people on the show. It's amazing how consistent they are.
That's a great thing. Yeah, that's a great point. It's a great thing, too.
I never thought of it this way until you do. If you were sitting in my seat, where, we have probably, I have to admit, we've got probably 5, 6 guys, and then one lady that comes on the show, and I'm telling you, it's amazing how consistent you guys are. Even though you're saying and using different words, it's the same principles. And it just fascinates me. And it just shows that if you're good, you're going to be talking the same language. You may be saying different things, but you're going to be talking the same language. So you should be able to locate people.
Right, and it's still the core issue at hand is still being addressed by all those individuals, I think is kind of the take-home point there.
Exactly. All right, now we're going up to the situation where now you're working with medical professionals that are telling you that you shouldn't be doing this, and you're saying, yes, it's proven that it does work. How would you work? What needs to happen at a communication level?
Well, Stephen, this happens more than the first situation that you brought up. In my world, this happens more frequently. Because the athlete always remains the hub of the wheel, if you will. And then there's numerous spokes, and you never know how many spokes you get in there. I guess it all depends on how much the agent or the athlete may trust you. And the same thing, when I say agent for a professional athlete, the same thing would correspond to the parent of the high school or developmental athlete. So you got all these, they're basically the agent. So you have all these spokes coming off the hub of the wheel. The athlete is still where the world goes round, but the spokes, you want the spokes to be all even, because if you have one person who has a greater voice than the others, that person in their ear, in that athlete's ear, is always going to override everyone else. And that's why I do my due diligence, at least on my end, to get that information first and foremost, or if that information comes about while we're going throughout the process, then I'll address it at that point. But my first step is always, always, always to reach out to the other people, the other spokes of the wheel. And sometimes the people are very open, and luckily for me, most of the people that I work with are people in my network, other individuals that I trust highly, and they know that I'm going to address the areas of my expertise and my niche to the best of my ability, and I'm going to keep them in open lines of communication across the bat. And I expect them to do the same thing. So you got to keep very open lines of communication, but sometimes you as the strength and conditioning coach or sports performance professional needs to be the individual to reach out to the other individuals in the group. Because sometimes egos get in the way. Some people are arrogant, some people are pompous, and they won't necessarily reach out unless you do so first. And I think that's the thing. As long as you have the overriding idea that the athlete comes first and it's everyone's best interest to come to the same page for the quality of the experience for the athlete, I think that's the biggest thing. And if you happen to come across somebody who, a spoke who's trying to be longer than the others, realize that probably is going to be very short-lived. It's the relationship and the process that's going to correspond to that relationship will have to be short-lived, because one spoke, the wheel doesn't turn if one spoke is larger than the rest.
Yeah, it basically you just crash and burn. Everybody else, not the person with the long spoke. It's everybody else will crash and burn, because that long spoke is the one he's listening to or she's listening to. And it's kind of funny. In the sales world, they call it column A. He who's in column A wins. B, C, and all that kind of stuff are there to support. But if you're in column A, you have like a more chance of winning than others, because that philosophy or that program is what they're gauging everybody else against. You know what I mean? So there has to be a pretty serious, need to switch off column A, if you will, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely it does, and I think it's definitely an appropriate analogy in this case, because that athlete is the thing that drives it all, and whoever is closest to his column, if you will, is going to help be a bigger influence in regards to the decisions he or she may make.
Now this is another thing too. Let's talk about it, because I do want to come back to there are some times when I'm trying to think of the situation. Like, say somebody does get hurt, and then the orthopedic surgeon then says, okay, it's going to be a 3.5-year recovery process. I'm just being facetious because I want it to not be meant for anything. But it's going to be a 3.5-year process. It's going to be basically you're going to sit on your butt for 3 years, and then the last 6 months is going to be the training, and then you'll be better. And then we'll see if you're better. You know what I mean? But they got the Suave, they got the fancy Ferrari out the back, and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then you come in there and say, as a strength coach, no, we can get this done in 3 months. So there's just such a big difference. There is so much trust. Talk about that trust, and how do you develop, or how do you understand, so as a parent or as an agent, that you can gain the trust that, okay, I can do it in 3 months, not in 3.5 years.
Well, I think there, I know you were using like an extreme example, but again, I see that happen very frequently, because you have people who are sticking to certain norms in many cases, especially when we look at the medical community. They typically stick to norms because they don't want to necessarily set the expectation level up too high for an athlete if they're not going to be able to achieve it. I don't necessarily want to do that either, but if it's something I believe in my heart of hearts, it's obviously something I'm going to pursue for that athlete's well-being. And I think a lot of times people's, bullshit radar goes off, if you will, if somebody were to be saying something to the athlete, such as you can be ready in 3 months or 6 months or whatever it might be, and if it's at a much reduced time frame than that which would be, being advocated by, say, the medical professional or someone else in the mix. And a lot of times, when you just show that you do care, I know it sounds cliche, but if you show the amount of care to go through the process, try to give the athlete all indications in regards to why you believe what it is that you're saying and why it is that you believe so strongly in his or her case, for that athlete to get back to neutral, if you will, and to start getting back to being the athlete that they used to be or the athlete that you believe they can be. By showing them case studies and things like that, sometimes that can go a long ways. But then to others and others' personalities, they're just going to say, yeah, but what about the guy who does drive the Ferrari who has worked with A, B, and C, and D athlete? They're always going to come back to that. And I think sometimes, by bringing it all together, trying to show how much you care, but yet at the same time trying to show how much thorough and detailed analysis you did of the process. At least that's what I do on my end, because you get a lot of athletes who aren't used to my style, at least in the National Football League. They're just used to somebody kind of riding their coattails, whereas I go through a much different process with my athlete before we ever even get started. So I really know them as a person, as a human being first, and then try to get an idea in regards to where it is that they want their career to go. And then I try to map out the best possible direction towards getting there, the best possible route towards getting there. And they can usually pick up on those things if someone is genuine and sincere about it.
Yes, because I'm going to give you two examples, because now it's funny, as you were talking, two examples on both ends, on both elite athletes will show. Adrian Peterson, basically had, I'm not familiar with exactly what, but he had a knee injury, at least ACL, but I believe it was MCL, if I'm not mistaken.
It was both. Yeah, it was both ACL and MCL.
Okay, so then, but he came back, and he did it in, 8.5 months or something like this, and was back at the beginning of the year. Maybe a little reduced from that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and then the other stream is Derrick Rose, who, I'm not from the ACL comes to mind, but I think there was something else as well. But on the other hand, he's already been through the 9-month process, and they're still continuing to hold him out. And it's funny because my son and I had this discussion this morning. Well, Derrick Rose is being a big, he's not following through. He should be out there kicking everybody's butt, even if he is going to get hurt. But on the other hand, you sit there and say, well, gosh, for 2 or 3 weeks, 10 years, 2-3 weeks, 10 years. Okay, if he's not feeling 100% confident, don't push it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so there's so many different nuances to that. And you had talked about getting to understand the athlete. If the athlete's not confident, you as the agent or the parent, you can push him all you want. It still isn't going to make it go faster.
Well, and I think on that specific example, I know that we're probably getting close to running out of time, and I'm probably going over, but, on that specific example of the two elite athletes, I think something that bears repeating is the idea of individuality there as well. Not only the individuality from the physical set, because every injury is different, everyone's physical qualities and motor potential that goes along with that is specific, but not only that, but something that you mentioned in regards to the mindset. What timeline the athlete has put on the injury, or even if it's a goal of any sort and the athlete isn't injured, the mindset that goes into it, and then finally the way that they play the game, Adrian's game is obviously highly based on concentric power production and development and just running people over and just being bigger, meaner, tougher than everybody else. And Derrick Rose's game is built on quick change of direction and in a phone booth, if you will. So it's different circumstances and it's different athletes.
See, and that's the thing. And it's so much is the individual, and that's where I think this whole discussion gets to. It's funny because all the words I used when I grew up, gets to, knows how, all that. It's so stupid. But when you arrive, you realize that it is an individual process. You do need to be doing the due diligence to understand the complete process, but if somebody doesn't take into account you as the individual, what they're doing, now you could be doing the same program as a team can, but there's certain times and places to push and pull. You still got to have a trainer that understands the complete process, not just, well, gosh, in the book they told me to do this. You know what I mean? That type of thing.
Right.
And there's so much difference. I mean, it's like a big white canyon right between that. So, anyways,
absolutely.
I think we have arrived, even though, again, like we mentioned last time, we could probably go on for quite a long time on all the different specifics. But where can people get a hold of you if they would like to get more information about your programs or what subject we covered today? Yeah,
absolutely. They can reach me personally at Shawn, SHAWN, at explosiveedgeathletics.com. I know that's the world's longest email address. Or they can just check out our website, which is explosiveedgeathletics.com. We're right down the road from Vikings headquarters, right on the border of Eden Prairie and Edina. So we're always looking to talk to anybody.
Cool. Thank you, Shawn.
You got it, my friend. I appreciate it.
Have a good day.
Right back at you.
Bye. All right. Again, I don't think there really needs to be anything more said in relation to this, but realize that each athlete is different. There are different goals in the process. They don't need to train at a very, very young age. They're not going to be left behind. Just so many great things will come out of today's. If you have any questions, please email me at McCarthy@themccarthyproject.com or go to our website. We'll have all the contact information for our guests today. That's McCarthyproject.com. And see everybody this weekend at the 5-star camp at Minnehaha. That is actually this weekend. And we will be back with you on, actually today is Wednesday, so we'll be back on Friday to be continue the discussion of communication, which I think is just totally critical with Shawn Goodsell. Have a great day.
You have been listening to The McCarthy Project, and remember to always attack life and sport.